Well, hello. I'm very excited today. I've got a phenomenal speaker for us today. Somebody that really is kind of in the know, knows what's going on in the entire aging community in Central Indiana. So, Dustin, Dustin Ziegler, would you go ahead and explain who you are, who Socoa is, and then I'm going to give you total reign, and you can take over the screen and do with your presentation.
Cool. That sounds good. Thanks, Jim. So my name is Dustin Ziegler. I'm Vice President of Clinical Integration at Socoa, Aging and In-Home Solutions. And so Socoa is the largest area agency on aging in the state of Indiana, serving Marion County and the surrounding counties. And I'll go into a little bit of detail here when I pull up my presentation, but our main goal while we get up in the morning is to provide the services, resources, and the support that older adults, anybody of any age with a disability, and also their family caregivers need to remain independent at optimal health for as long as possible, as opposed to institutionalized care, like you would find in a nursing home. So with this aging population, we've been rapidly growing. Our impact is significant, and you're going to learn here through a couple of recent updates and some data that
do you want to just do a screen share on your computer so you can control it, or do you want me to do it?
I'll do a screen share here.
Okay.
Yeah, that way
You should have an access right there at the bottom.
Okay.
There you go.
Are we rocking and rolling?
Yep.
Very good. So yeah, so we'll just jump right into it. So this is kind of a high level information sharing about basically where we are at today with the state of aging in Indiana, where we're going, and some of the trends and Socoa's involvement with that. So just a little bit on Socoa. This is our mission statement. As I mentioned, the way I like to sum up Socoa, we provide the resources, services, and support that older adults and anybody of any age and their caregivers need to remain at home and independent for as long as possible. And that is done through a wide range of different services and resources, some that Socoa provides directly, and others that we coordinate care for. So as you see here in this slide, our main area here is the 8 counties in central Indiana, which is also the largest population density in the state. In fact, there's 15 total area agencies on aging in Indiana, but Socoa's service area serves about 25% of the entire population. So that gives you an idea about the rapid growth here in central Indiana and the 8 counties we serve. We are a nonprofit, multiple funding sources, very, very complex organization actually, but rapidly expanding, not only in the services we provide, but actually in how we fund ourselves to deliver those services. And so a quick snapshot of our clients. Obviously older adults is in our name, but what some people don't know, a lot of people actually don't know, Socoa serves, again, anybody of any age with a disability. So we actually have kids that are as young as newborns on the NICU, up to people who are 100 plus and everything in between. So the way I kind of look at Socoa and typically describe Socoa is more of a disability oriented focus. It just so happens that older adults are more likely to have, chronic disabilities, which is where the focus is. But anybody of any age, we do serve. And a big emphasis is on family caregivers too. Family caregivers have always been a huge, components of the health outcomes and independence of clients. It's actually only, in my opinion, in my experience recently, in the last few years, that the caregiver, the informal caregiver, so whether that's a spouse, a son or daughter, a neighbor, whoever that may be, only recently has healthcare in general been really focusing on the role of the caregiver and their health and wellness as it relates to caring for this population. So we do provide services and support for the unpaid family caregivers as well. So in a nutshell, I gave kind of my spiel about how I define SECOA. We are the front door for access to just about anything related to aging and independent living. So that can be in the form of information and referral, all the way up to actual care management services and everything in between. But we are the access channel to what we call home and community-based services. And as it applies here down at the bottom, it can be the difference between independence in your home or community setting or institutionalization for long-term care. And to give you one data example of our impact, on average, those who are today eligible, like if today I was eligible and had a level of care for nursing home placement, if I got SECOA intervention, I would be able to remain at home and independent still in my community for over 3 years. And so that's over 3 years at average that our clients are able to be where they want to be, usually in the most optimal care setting, and actually at about half the costs as you would find in institutionalized care. So SECOA is the door to access that. And when we look at some of the home and community-based services that we refer to, these are some examples. Some of these SECOA provides directly. Others we coordinate care for and connect people to. But as you can see, there's numerous services that SECOA accesses for clients, all in the name of ensuring their independence and quality of life in their community setting. So when we look at these services, while we can refer to or provide these directly, case management is particularly SECOA's largest service line. And with case management, this is basically what it entails in a very short nutshell. So when we look at case management, when we have folks who are on our service and we case manage them, it is a person-centered care plan that revolves around their own individualized goals, what they want, and their quality of life. So no two people are the same. So when we look at care managed clients and we assess them and put a care plan together, which SECOA is the care plan developer and organizer for care managed clients within Indiana, or I'm sorry, Central Indiana. We look to see, what is your short-term goal? What do you want to do? I mean, it could be just as simple as I want to get back up and be able to just bake a cake for Easter coming up. So what can we do from a quality of life perspective and a functional perspective to coordinate services to help that individual be able to meet that goal? And in doing so, it involves a lot, but those what seem relatively small goals are a huge impact to people's quality of life and their overall health and wellness. And so this image here demonstrates kind of our core principles when it comes to care management of clients. Care management, you just saw these services here. Care management can involve all of these services and actually more, including the coordination of home health care with some of our provider partners within the home health care space. And here's just a brief snapshot to kind of tell the story of SECOA's reach within the Central Indiana community. And you see here down the bottom right, 400 plus children. So that's the reflection, children defined as under 18 years old, of that population that we do serve as well. What's very interesting, so I've been at SECOA 5.5 years. When I first started at SECOA, you'll notice the number of care managed clients there is 12,040 as of last year, 2021. When I started at SECOA, it was roughly 6,000. So within about 5 years, SECOA has doubled in our growth and the number of people that we serve. And that's a direct reflection of the aging population and the needs and also the awareness that these services are available. So when it comes to the state of aging, what I'm going to share here is just a very, very highest level snapshot of some of the considerations. At the end of this slide deck, I'm going to share a resource that is extraordinarily valuable, relatively new. I sit on their advisory committee. It's called the State of Aging Research Report. And it is a endless wealth of information and statistics like we haven't ever seen before, that anybody can access and identify updated information. It is a living document through what's called the Pulse Center through IUPUI, and also a number of partners, Regan Street Institute, IU School of Medicine, Central Indiana Community Foundation, and just to name a few. But for now, let's take a little look into the state of things. So these are some of the core statistics that we look at here. I don't think it's a shock to anybody who maybe part of this presentation as an attendee that we have a very, very rapidly aging population like we have never seen before. And you see here, the number of folks aged 65 years plus. This is a national a county projection here in Indiana, Central Indiana, expected to double just by 2035. What has always stood out to me when we look about some of these numbers, and it's been a few years that we've been talking about this, but now we're almost there, and so we're approaching a first time in United States history, as it's been recorded, situation where the number of folks who are children under age 15, people age 65 and older are going to outnumber them for the very first time ever. So by 2030, the number of people 65 and older, the first time in history in the United States, will actually outnumber children age 15 or younger. So it's just a reflection of the direction we're going with our society and our population. So some standouts to me, again, these are just some samples of a little bit of a snapshot of the state of aging here in Indiana. Some of these numbers seem like we're doing okay. Some of them, there's definitely some room for improvement. So in general, in the state of Indiana from 2019, about 1/3 of our population as it stands today is age 55 years or older. 39% of those roughly are living alone. 8.6% poverty rate among those. And it's interesting too, because that can really vary throughout the state of Indiana. I mean, even just in the 8 counties that SACOA serves, there could be a very wide variance in poverty from even one side of town, to another. But on average, you're looking at about an 8.6 poverty rate among older adults. What does seem to be a relatively high number to me, 39% having difficulty meeting daily expenses. So when you're starting to kind of approach half of the population, 55 or older, who reports that they're having difficulty meeting these expenses, it's certainly something to pay attention to. And then, of course, you see the median household income of older adults, 55 or older, being around roughly $55,000 a year. So that's the demographics and financials side of things. When it comes to food and housing, you see these numbers here. Of these, what stands out to me more than anything, you can review these numbers here as you look at them. But down at the bottom there, 30% of households spend more than 30% of income on their housing. And what's, to me at least, a little bit alarming, 13% of households spend more than 50% of their income on housing expenses. And so the housing issue is definitely one that's front and center here, not only in Central Indiana, but across the state of Indiana, and really is a national trend when we look at statistics as well. When it relates to isolation, transportation, and what we call aging in place. So this is interesting to me too. 38% report a sense of being isolated. That was pre-COVID. So we're looking at 2019. I am very interested to see what those numbers are post-COVID. I think we're going to see possibly an alarming increase in the sense of being isolated. And why that matters, as you can see that under that, this is I quoted here 2016 Harvard University, but it's interesting, this actual study outcome has been consistent across numerous studies, interestingly enough, all coming to the exact same conclusion that when it comes to isolation and lack of socialization for the older adult population, it actually has a physiological, not just a mental or a perception, but an actual physiological association to the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so that really, to me, has always drove home the impact of isolation and what that means for our older adult health and wellness in our population. The fact that, when we talk about the connection between mind and body, there are physiological consequences to this isolation. And so, based on that, and now even, with COVID coming through, certainly a very high priority topic for us to be focusing on. When you look to 38% report challenges carrying out daily activities, that seems a little high to me as well, to know that high amount of folks are challenged on a daily basis to do some of the basic activities that we all take for granted. So just, doing the laundry, cooking a meal, mowing the lawn. These are daily challenges that can impact and influence the capacity and ability for our older adult vulnerable population to be able to remain at home and independent if they don't have support with some of these things. And then a little snapshot about the overall health conditions and this is again in Indiana, statewide from 2019. You can see these numbers here too. To me, as you review these numbers, alarmingly, the suicide rate to me stands out significantly. So age 55 years or older, suicide is almost 17% in the 55 years or older population. That is, in my opinion, a crisis level type of situation. And when we look at the cause of that, the etiology of why that may be going on, I think there's a number of things that we can look at. Certainly depression, anxiety, loneliness, all those things. But I think definitely an area that is worth more investigation and research into that statistic. And again, this is from 2019, so I will be interested to see, has that number even increased, maybe even a little bit more from 17% almost since COVID and the isolation consequences that have occurred. And then lastly, you see here at the bottom, 29% accessing quality, affordable healthcare. For me, that seems like a relatively low number, something that's definitely worthy of improving on. But then again, too, as we're looking at a snapshot of the whole state, that can vary widely between one, not just region of the state to another, but even within the same city, the ability to access quality, affordable healthcare. So when we think about the state of aging and healthcare here locally, Indiana as a state and across the nation and actually across the world, I just feel like we can never not include the state of Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the more impactful quotes that I've seen, this is from an institution out in the United Kingdom who's always been a leading institution when it comes to dementia-related research and studies and health policy. Dementia is the greatest health challenge of our time. And I would agree 100% with that. COVID has come in on a hopefully temporary short-term basis and kind of taken the spotlight about, when it comes to health impacts and costs of care and costs of disease. But in the long run, Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias is at a crisis level, and it's a quiet crisis, but it is absolutely a crisis on multiple fronts. And so we'll dive into that specifically a little bit here. So, and I'm not at this time going to really dive into, pathology and disease process when it comes to dementia, but more kind of stick to the higher level just considerations of it. But for the sake of definition, when we think about dementia, as it mentions here, it's a term for basically an impairment in memory, thinking, language, and other cognitive abilities that have such as sufficient severity that it interferes with daily life. And so on the slide here, you see that it's an umbrella term. And the way I have traditionally defined the term dementia is that it's a symptom, no different than what we would equate to a fever being a symptom. And so with a fever, there could be numerous underlying causes as to what inevitably is the root cause of that fever as a symptom presentation. But the presentation itself is a high temperature fever. Dementia is the same kind of concept here. Dementia is not its own disease process. It's a symptom presentation of an underlying cognitive impairment that can be caused by various different things, of course. As you can see here, Alzheimer's disease specifically reflects about 60 to 80% of dementia cases, but there are other disease processes that can cause these cognitive impairments that do differ from one to the other, but at the end of the day, fall under that umbrella of a impairment of cognitive deficiency that impairs daily life functioning. Sometimes even when we think about symptoms of dementia, it's they can even be temporary. There's variables like medications, disease, other disease processes, hormones, nutritional deficiencies. There's a lot of things that can present sometimes the symptoms of dementia that it can actually be reversed. That's why we always encourage people that if you're worried about yourself or a loved one, go seek your doctor for an assessment, because it could be something that could easily be reversible. And as we mentioned, so Alzheimer's disease, when we think about dementia, is the high majority of dementia cases, representing 60 to 80%, is now the 5th leading cause of death overall, up from the 6th leading cause of death not that long ago. In my career and in my research in this field, one thing that's always been kind of in the background is that when we think about Alzheimer's disease being the 5th leading cause of death, that is actually determined by measuring and calculating death certificates. But when we take a step back and we look at the actual situations here, Alzheimer's disease could actually be the 3rd leading cause of death, as it's been projected, if it was more accurately reflected on death certificates. So, for example, somebody may have had Alzheimer's disease for 15 years. They're in the end stages of that condition. And because of that condition, during their last days, they develop pneumonia. And technically, their cause of death is pneumonia, but in reality, their cause of death was Alzheimer's disease, because the chronic degeneration and progressive degeneration of the condition is what led to the pneumonia, which inevitably is what led to their cause of death. So it's a little bit controversial, for lack of better terms, that the number could be much higher, actually, than the 5th leading cause of death. As of today, 6 million people currently in the United States have Alzheimer's disease. Only within the next 15, 20 years is that supposed to more than double or triple, roughly, to about 13 million. And interesting enough, it's the leading cause of disability for folks who are age 65 and older. And for the longest time, at least from my perspective, when I've talked about Alzheimer's disease and treatments and and it's always been that there really isn't any as far as a disease modifying compound is concerned, which means basically a medication that can definitively slow down or stop the disease progression, not just help with symptoms, but actually slow down the pathology. Um, we technically have one, and it's very controversial. People have probably heard about this in the news. Aducanumab. It is a technically disease modifying agent that the FDA did approve. Um, and its mechanism basically is to remove what's called beta amyloid in the brain and slow down the accumulation of beta amyloid, which in turn slows down the disease pathology. So technically, it means that people can live not only longer, but at a higher cognitive and physical functionality because of the slowing of the disease process. Why it's controversial, this actual compound was suspended by a company named Biogen a few years ago, and then was then reintroduced. And so if you're looking at traditional scientific rigor and how things are approved and looked at, the efficacy of this compound particularly, one could argue it isn't definitively proven that it works. And so that's why it's a little bit controversial, just based on the traditional way that we assess and approve and understand quality and efficacy of drug compounds for the condition that they're being prescribed for. It's also a very, very expensive drug compound. So it's just something to look into. People make their own decisions, talk to their doctor if they're interested in pursuing that route. There are some encouraging other compounds that are coming down the pipeline that have shown a lot of hope, even here locally. And Eli Lilly has a compound that's in third stage trial that's showing a lot of great progress too. And it's kind of the same mechanism, kind of the same drug category, where it's a beta amyloid remover, which helps slow down the disease process. So looking at Indiana, a quick graph. This is based on Medicare and Medicaid billing numbers. What's interesting here too is that when you look at these numbers, because it's from a Medicare report, it reflects those who have actually been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or a related type of dementia. Where these numbers at minimum are what they appear here, it could actually be much larger, is that it does not reflect those who may have a Alzheimer's pathology or another type of dementia who has not yet been diagnosed. And that still remains a pretty significant barrier in healthcare today with this condition, is that it goes very frequently undiagnosed for a number of reasons. And actually, recent research and studies have shown even up to 4 out of 5 physicians can miss the diagnosis of Alzheimer's or another dementia, or other research has demonstrated barriers to physicians not wanting to disclose a diagnosis of dementia to a loved one, thinking that it would be more of a burden to know than to not know. And so there's a lot of work to do when it comes to that. But as we look at these numbers, my personal side of things is I think these numbers are actually quite a bit higher, not only here in Indiana, but throughout the country. And then we can't talk about Alzheimer's and dementia without the caregivers who support them, these informal caregivers, again, whether it's a spouse, child, neighbor, friend. And caregivers, specifically of those with dementia, I've always termed as the second patient. You have the person, the primary patient, who has the pathology of a disease of dementia, whether that's Alzheimer's or something else. but more than an abundance of evidence to demonstrate that those informal caregivers who are caring for them suffer their own health consequences as a result of their caregiving duties for those with Alzheimer's and related dementia. And a lot of evidence to show that. So the actual physiological, the actual health and wellness of caregivers because of their caregiving role is significantly being impacted. And so you'll see here much higher, and this is very specific to dementia caregiving, much higher emotional stress, depression, anxiety, causes of leading to other chronic conditions, specific to their caregiving role of dementia compared to other conditions, and certainly, of course, those of similar ages who are not caregivers. And this is based on 2020 data. And from a financial fiscal side of things, about 204 million hours, and this is just, this is in the United States, of unpaid care specific to dementia it was delivered in 2020 with an equated value of almost $4.3 billion. So it's $4.3 billion that informal caregivers are providing on their own time and to support their loved ones with this condition. And so when I talk about caregivers and the impact that caregiving has specifically on dementia, this is a quick little snapshot that kind of, I think, paints the picture of the impact that it has specific to dementia. So you'll see in these numbers, the first one being specific to dementia caregivers, the rate of these chronic conditions versus in the middle, people who are still caregivers, but not of people with dementia. And then the third one being people who are of an age range, 18 years or older, but are not caregivers. And so when you look at these, what would be defined as some of the core fundamental chronic conditions in the United States, those who are caring for somebody with dementia have higher rates of these conditions in every single disease category, which is a reflection of the impact and the stress and the health consequences of caregiving for people with dementia, which certainly reflects that we need to continue to focus on resources and services for those caregivers in our here locally and also in our country. So to highlight one area that can combat some of this stuff, if you haven't heard of it yet, Dementia Friends Indiana. It's a remarkably successful and impactful movement that started in 2017. SACOA is the state administrator for Dementia Friends Indiana. Why we love this movement so much, it has nothing to do with medicine. It has everything to do with things that are within our control to help folks with dementia and their caregivers, which actually genuinely equates to better health outcomes and independence and well-being. And so at its core, Dementia Friends Indiana aims to basically just break down the stigma of the condition, make people more aware and understanding of exactly what dementia is, and then they're tasked and challenged to take an action to do something about this, given the fact that it's the most complex, expensive condition in our country. And so those actions can come in the form of a variety of things, but the ultimate goal is how do we, until there's a disease modifying agent that can actually generally slow down this disease process and make people's lives better from a pharmaceutical standpoint, what can we do now in our communities, in our hometowns, to improve the lives of people living with dementia, their caregivers, and the communities as a whole? And so Dementia Friends Indiana has been a remarkable solution to these types of things. And it doesn't take a whole lot of heavy lifting either. Simple things, just by getting people aware and connected to Dementia Friends, making churches, restaurants, businesses in your communities more dementia friendly and welcoming and conducive to this population, making people with dementia and their loved ones feel welcome to where they continue to go to their church, they go to their favorite restaurant, they get out of the house. That isolation, which is so common with dementia, is reduced. And as we can go back to earlier, we know what that isolation consequence has on health and wellness. And so this movement seeks to be a catalyst for those improvements. So if you haven't been involved, I would encourage you to look into it and get involved and see what you can do, because this condition affects every single person in one way or another these days. These are very high level. They don't, you don't have to go and achieve these type of accomplishments with Dementia Friends Indiana, but to give you an idea of the impact that we've had just since 2017, there's almost 10,000 Dementia Friends now in Indiana. In fact, we anticipate hitting that mark this month here in March, which is not too shabby given that we only began this in the fall of 2017. Dementia and Dementia Friends Indiana, it affects all community sectors. And so this seeks to impact all community sectors, however large or small, by increasing knowledge and awareness, and then taking action within those sectors to make life just a little bit easier and welcoming for people with dementia. Some of the really significant impacts that Dementia Friends Indiana has had since 2017, you'll see on the fourth bullet point down, DFI was a catalyst for establishing what was termed a dementia care advisory group that actually through that led to the Indiana State Plan on Dementia that was just recently passed by the General Assembly in Indiana in 2021. So that was a huge policy accomplishment. And it's through Dementia Friends Indiana as a catalyst that we got to this point. And why I think it's so successful, why I think people are drawn to it and it's moving the needle so well, is because, in my opinion, it's a simple way of looking at dementia in a positive light, and it helps. That positive light breaks down the stigma, and it helps people want to talk about it, not be ashamed of it, and that positivity and encouragement of getting involved and doing something about it, I think is what really motivates people. And so in addition to the State Plan on Dementia, this is a largest of its kind achievement that occurred in 2019, I believe, where through a partnership with the Indiana Department of Homeland Security under their EMS division, established the largest statewide focus on first responder training for dementia that at least we're aware of in the entire United States. And then very recently, and this is another huge accomplishment that even had me scratching my head to some point thinking, how did we do this? How did we actually get here? First in the nation integration of Dementia Friends into a first-year medical school curriculum that just so happened to be the largest medical school in the United States and IU School of Medicine. Why that is so significant? When we look at practitioners and we look at medical school and how they treat and focus on this condition, it's very disease focused. With Dementia Friends Indiana, by being able to introduce dementia and from the lens and perspective of Dementia Friends Indiana, it sets a foundation for these future physicians about how to approach this condition when treating it, that there is a person behind the condition more than just the disease, that a lot of what's going to be the most valuable tools for a family living with a condition has nothing to do with medicine. It has everything to do with education, support, and resources. And just securing that way of thinking about the condition early before they get into pathology, pharmacology, all those different types of elements. My hope is that this type of way of looking at this condition sticks with these future physicians for the rest of their practicing career. And that's why we feel that this is so important, that we've made this accomplishment to get this information and this perspective to these future physicians early, because it can change the entire trajectory of how this condition is approached and treated. So with all that said, that's again, very high level snapshot of today's state of aging in Indiana. With that, the actual landscape of our healthcare is changing rapidly as well. And so I'm going to touch on just a little bit of that too, to introduce some things to be top of mind going forward. So the number one thing that's at the top these days is what's called social determinants of health. It's interesting because even 3 or 4 years ago, most of the clinical community could not define what social determinants of health were. Now it's in the strategic plan of every hospital system in the state of Indiana. And you can see the definition here, but basically what it comes down to is 20% of health outcomes are a result of actual clinical application. So the things that go on in the doctor's office, in the hospital setting, reflect about 20% of your overall health outcome. The other 80% is all the other stuff that goes on when you leave that clinical setting. So what goes on in your community? What goes on in your home? Do you have transportation to get to the doctor's office? Can you afford food and groceries to complement, the nutrition? Does your caregiver caring for you have the proficiency to carry out their caregiving duties in a way that optimizes your health? All those things that go on in the community and home setting that can influence health and wellness is basically what social determinants are, and they represent 80% of health outcomes. And so medicine is very rapidly gravitating towards that and factoring in that you could have the best doctor in the world, prescribe the best medication in the world, but that's only 20% of achieving the goal of the health outcome. And so what about these other things that go on? And so a big focus is on these social determinants of health these days, and is actually changing kind of the approach to medicine and healthcare in general. You may have heard of value-based healthcare. And so this is not yet universal, but rapidly, approaching that, where healthcare used to be more what was called a fee-for-service model, where you would go to the doctor or you go to the hospital, and based on assessment and your condition, various treatments and care plans would be made and then billed for, but without necessarily looking at what impact did it make on health outcomes. Now we are gravitating towards what's called a value-based healthcare system, where the bottom line is for reimbursements and standard of care, it is associated with health outcomes, actual outcomes of what care did to somebody. And so when you hear about, readmissions and avoidable emergency department visits and stuff like that, that is a value-based healthcare model where, under certain payer sources, if you're readmitted, say, for example, with the same issue within 30 days, the health system may get dinged for that or not reimbursed for that second admission, because in the eyes of a value-based system, why wasn't that condition, generally speaking, treated in a way that should have resulted in that readmission not occurring to begin with? So you look at this graphic here, it kind of gives you the different domains of value-based care. But another huge component of where healthcare is going, particularly with the older adult population. And then you may have heard of age-friendly health systems, which is also relatively new-ish, but still rapidly growing. And this is centered around what's called the 4 M's. And so you can see the definition of what an age-friendly system is defined as here. And at its core, it's about the 4 M's that we call: 1, what matters; 2, medication; 3, mentation, which is represented as mind here, and then 4, mobility. Those 4 core elements are what identified as being the most essential to older adults and their outcomes and quality of life and goals for their care. And so with our rapidly aging population, more and more health systems and hospitals are adopting these types of protocols and looking at the person beyond just the disease state. And so when you think about that, a 35-year-old who comes into the emergency room with a condition versus a 85-year-old who comes into the emergency room with the exact same condition could result in 2 completely different approaches to care based on what matters to that older adult individual. Maybe there's some procedures that traditional medicine would say, we need to do this, but that's not what the older adult wants, or it affects their quality of life. And so from a care standpoint, what matters to this person with their health and their situation, a very person-centered approach. And this is very interesting and a very interesting time here in the state of Indiana, where we are moving as a whole into what's called a managed care long-term support services model. And this is actually reflective of value-based care that we talked about just a minute ago within the medical system. With this managed care model, it takes some of the same approaches. So for agencies like SACOA, who coordinate care for older adults to remain in their home and independent for as long as possible, traditionally that has just been on a fee-for-service model. We know what people need, we get them what they need, that's billed for, and that was kind of the model. With managed care now, it's going to be switching to more of a outcome-based model, to where what interventions did we do? How did that affect the outcomes of this person's health and wellness, as measured by, certain metrics, and then reimbursement being tied to that. And managed care in and of itself is not a vanilla approach. It can come in many different varieties. But what we're probably looking at here in Indiana is that the state of Indiana will be contracting to a managed care organization to oversee the SACOAs of the world, other agencies in Indiana, to deliver these services. And the model, basically in its simplest form, means that these managed care organizations will provide an agency like SACOA a fixed certain amount of dollars to care for a particular member based on their condition. And then the better the outcome of that person's condition, the more incentive there is for reimbursement for stuff like, what we get paid to actually deliver that. Very similar to what the hospital systems are doing right now. And so one of the priorities here, again, this varies state by state. And if I'm not mistaken, I think roughly close to 50% of states in the United States have moved to a managed care model of some type. In Indiana specifically, and this is not finalized by any means, but these are what is projected, is that part of this Medicaid dollars for long-term support services in the home and community-based settings will be kind of reallocated to where 50% is spent on these home and community-based services to keep people in their home and in their community, as opposed to institutionalized care. That's a dramatic increase by the state of Indiana based on the current rate of about 19% of Medicaid dollars going to keeping people in their home, as opposed to like an institutionalized nursing home setting. Equal to that, or aligned with that, the goal is to increase the rate of people receiving long-term support services, that 75% of folks who are otherwise eligible for a level of care of nursing home placement actually remain in their home and in their community with home and community-based services and healthcare. Currently, about 45% of the population who's eligible for nursing home placement remains at home and independent. So another pretty high increase there. And access to home and community-based services within 72 hours is another big, ambitious goal of managed care, that when you get referred to an agency like SECOA, and SECOA makes contact and provides an assessment within 72 hours, that person is getting resources and services in their home. And so, like I mentioned earlier, these a part of this has to do with reimbursement, and similar to a value-based model, outcomes and incentives will be based on quality of care and not just simply delivering care. So SECOA specifically, as you might imagine, this is a rapidly changing landscape in both the population and healthcare in general. And so that's what we're focusing on, expanding our collaborations with health and hospital systems. When we talk about 80% of health outcomes being associated with the type of services the SECOAs of the world provide, it only makes sense that we integrate with health and hospital systems so that we can partner together to maximize health outcomes of this rapidly growing, vulnerable and expensive patient population. So even one of my main goals at SECOA is to develop these relationships and these partnerships with health and hospital systems, to coordinate care and maximize health outcomes. And so SECOA is getting more and more of a clinically oriented mindset. And as you can see here, actually, SECOA is proudly leading our peers throughout the country in this approach, even to the extent of being the only area agency on aging in the United States that's been formally recognized as having an official medical advisory council to help guide us on these things. This is relatively new to us, but has taken off extraordinarily rapidly, is our role in research. Conducting research in partnership with other academic and research institutions to help identify best practices, models of care, other components that help drive our decisions about the services we provide and how we provide them. And we've been at this formally for about 1.5 years, and as you can see, have made some strong headways with some very incredible partners on a national level, stretching all the way out to California. So the list here is just some of our current projects with some of our partners from the research side of things. And then, as you might imagine, when we talk about this population and caring for them, it's a different model, it's a different approach. And so these future clinicians within the workforce, how do we get them to look differently at medicine, how they look differently at treating these populations compared to the more disease-centered approach to healthcare? And so we're working with a number of different entities to help provide that education and workforce understanding about all these different concepts of care when it comes to this population. So, working with family, internal medicine, primary care, residency physicians to introduce them to these models. We have partnerships, as you can see, IU School of Occupational Therapy, IU School of Medicine, just trying to do our part to support the increased understanding and mindset of how this population can best be served from a healthcare standpoint, and the various considerations for approaching that healthcare. So that is a very high-level snapshot of the state of aging in healthcare in Indiana. I've listed here, if you want to learn more or look into things more, these are 4 really strong resources. I mentioned earlier about one resource that you could literally spend all day on. And if you want to learn more, it's centralindiana.stateofaging.org. If you go to that site, or just Google, Central Indiana State of Aging Report, it is going to take you to a wealth of current and ongoing information and data in just about every capacity you can think of when it comes to the state of aging, particularly in central Indiana, RA County service area. So a wealth of knowledge there if you want to learn more about some of the things that we've been talking about today. SECOA ourselves on our website, we do what's called an Envision Lecture Series, which touches on a number of different topics, age-related and otherwise, that are novel and usually at the forefront of research and just the state of things. Alzheimer's Association is a great resource to learn more about what's going on demographically and financially with Alzheimer's and other related dementias in our communities. And then if you want to see the example of what I referenced earlier about the Dementia Strategic Plan in Indiana that was recently adopted, you can, might be easiest just to Google Indiana Dementia Strategic Plan and Report 2021, where you can read the actual legislation that centers around the policies and initiatives of a dementia capable state in Indiana that we've been addressing, that I talked about earlier. And if you want to follow SECOA, we're on all the social media channels if you're not following already. So with that said, if I can provide any more information or share any more details, I would be happy to do so with the time that we have left here.
Dustin, thank you so much. That's an amazing amount of information there. So it's hard to get it all into our head here. Yeah. One of the couple things I wrote down, a couple quick questions I had, and I'm watching to see if anybody has questions that are coming in. But one of the things that I was going to say is, we were talking about the number of caregivers. I was at SECOA today at the Marion County Coalition on Aging, and the speaker was from the Alzheimer's Association, and she was mentioning there was approximately 11 million caregivers for Alzheimer's alone. I have read that 1 in 3 households has a caregiver that's taking care of someone for some disabled situation. Is what kind of numbers are we looking at out there?
Yeah, that's I mean, I would have to look into a little bit more detail as to actual formal numbers, but if we account for everything, in my opinion, it's epidemic kind of quiet crisis level. And that comes in a number of ways. Just Alzheimer's and related dementia alone, you saw the numbers of the impact and even the financial side of caregiving just for that condition. But there's a whole host of other conditions, whether it's people with disabilities, or another really big one these days is what's called kinship care, where it's grandparents who are caring for grandchildren. And that in and of itself, really across the nation, has become a real big issue. We're talking about the average profile being older adults who on their own already struggle with day-to-day living and finances and stuff, now being the sole responsible caregiver and raising their grandchildren for whatever reason. But one thing that's really skyrocketed, that is the epidemic of the opioid epidemic. So people either passing away or being incarcerated because of the opioid epidemic. And then where do their children go? Well, more often than not, they're going to be going to their grandparents. So it's interesting. It's one epidemic that dominoes and creates a different epidemic, opioid epidemic, creating this kinship care epidemic. So it's alarming in a number of ways. Obviously the financial side, but the health consequences and the health and wellness of caregiving in these roles is impacting just our overall population health as a whole.
I recently became aware of and had looked into the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, where she's working with caregivers that are caring for a family member husband, spouse, whatever, who was injured and disabled in battle or in war or what have you. So that's another big number that we don't necessarily think about all the time, but there, it's a big number. Going through Dementia Friends class, one of the things that really stunned me was the death rate of the caregivers compared to the person they're caring for. Yeah, if you want to touch on that, because I don't know if everybody realizes just how critical this caregiver support is.
Yeah, and that's why when I reference, particularly with dementia-related conditions, it really being a second patient, and that's evidenced by a lot of empirical evidence, specific particularly to dementia caregiving, extraordinarily higher rates of, not just mental health issues, but higher rates of cancer, evidence of reduced immune system responses, much higher levels of cortisol issues, much higher levels of diabetes, and things that are like empirically directly associated physiologically to the stress of caregiving for somebody. And so what is encouraging to me and to the industry, I feel like, is that is beginning to be recognized more and more within the healthcare community, that if I'm treating a patient, let's just say with dementia, I need to be treating their loved one too. Different reasons, but I really have two patients sitting here in front of me, one with the pathology of the condition, one with different pathology because of caring for their loved one with that condition. And so that is being recognized. And so more emphasis on getting caregivers the resources, the education, and the support that they need to carry out their caregiving duties, and recognizing the impact that caregivers have on not only health outcomes for those that they're caring for, but population health as a whole. But yeah, it's fascinating. The research that's been coming out that actually, it directly associates actual physiological changes because of these caregiving duties that result in higher rates of morbidity and higher rates of mortality. So the good news is, I guess we're aware of it and we know it. And now we're starting to kind of chip away at addressing it a little bit better than we have in the past.
Yeah, I believe I heard that there was something like 60% of people that the caregiver actually passed away before the person they're caring for. That stunned me when I first heard those numbers. So, but I get it. It's 24/7, 365, no breaks, no what have you. Exactly. I stole your screen for a second. I just wanted to show people real quick what's going on here. First of all, this video will be put into the resources on lifescopilot.com. You'll be able to go into video library and it will be there. I will do what I can to make sure we can put the slides attached to that video, so you'll be able to find them there. And then I want to show you real quickly what's coming up. Obviously today we just did, Dustin just did a phenomenal job for us. We have one coming up March 22nd. Jeff Stinson, elder law attorney, will be doing the common myths on VA and Medicaid. We have, we're bringing in a new Life Copilot member from Seattle, who's going to be teaching really the real estate world of the senior market real estate. That's her specialty. She's been dealing with that quite a bit. Just booked of the 26th will be, it's going to be non-traditional medical care. We'll have a provider that is just you pay so much a month to be there. You don't have to do insurance. We'll have all these in-home doctors, all these different ones that we have. It's going to be a really good panel, so I'm very excited about that. So you'll be able to find those resources here. They're always here. There's always upcoming events. So lifescopilot.com can get you there. So Dustin, thank you so much for sharing with us. Does anybody have any questions for Dustin before we call this a day? So well, this video will be on Life Copilot. It will be on Life Copilot Facebook page. It'll be on Life Copilot Alignable page. It'll be on LinkedIn. It'll be all over the place. And I'll get you a copy as well, Dustin, in case you want to use it for whatever you want to use it for. But thank you so much for sharing with us. This was phenomenal.
Of course. Always happy to.
All right. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.